This might have been the best weekend of college wrestling we've had so far in the season. There were some gnarly duels, some comebacks, and some pretty big upsets. But I want to start with Keegan O'Toole's comeback win over Peyton Hall. And Peyton Hall, he comes out strong and gets 2 takedowns in the first period. So he's leading Keegan O'Toole 6-1 after 3 minutes of wrestling. And if you're down 6-1 versus a number 14th ranked guy in the country, in most cases, that match is over. But come on, I mean, this is Keegan O'Toole we're talking about here. He clawed his way back into the match and ends up getting the victory. But it was not easy. He had to wrestle hard in every single exchange. So this wasn't really a collapse by any means by Peyton Hall. It really was Keegan O'Toole just picking it up and working for these takedowns. These were long exchanges, some pretty good scrambles, and Keegan O'Toole was just able to come out on top. So Keegan O'Toole is still undefeated on the year, but this just leaves more questions at 165 pounds. I am obsessed with thinking about Keegan O'Toole versus David Carr versus Mitchell Messenbrink. I think about it all the time, and let me tell you, I have no idea what's going to happen. I do not know what to expect in the least. But that's what makes college wrestling so fun and makes the tournament so fun. So I can't wait to see this all play out. And Keegan O'Toole wasn't the only comeback of the weekend. We had Ohio State come back and beat their arch rival, arch nemesis, Michigan. But it started out with a commanding lead by Michigan, with Michael D'Agostino getting a tech fall over McCrone of Ohio State. That was followed up by Dylan Ragusin really controlling a match over Nick Bouzakis. And then at 141 pounds, Jesse Mendez gets a forfeit, which is unfortunate for Michigan because if they send anyone out there, they probably win the duel. Jesse Mendez is very good, but he's not really a pinner. He probably gets a tech fall versus a backup or even a backup 133 pounder, but Michigan didn't have a guy. And so Ohio State gets 6 points, and that ends up giving them the dual meet victory. But the biggest result to me in this duel was at 149 pounds, where Austin Gomez beats All-American Dylan D'Amelio by a major decision. And the reason I think it is a big result because last year Austin was hurt for the NCAA tournament and he retired from college wrestling. He was moving on to freestyle. So during the summer, during the fall semester, he probably wasn't wrestling folk style very often. And so with his announcement to come back to college wrestling and wrestle for Michigan, obviously we all knew the potential of Austin Gomez, but there were some variables or some unknowns that kind of left us wondering what he would look like in the college season. But after this match, it's pretty clear that those unknowns and those concerns have been resolved. And after this match, it's pretty clear that Austin Gomez really is a title contender at 149 pounds. And in 2 weeks, Austin Gomez will wrestle Ridge Lovett, and that is going to be must-see wrestling. But the 174-pound match was not must-see wrestling. I don't know about you, but I've been a little bit let down with Shane Griffith's performance this year. I don't know if he's checked out or if he's ready to move on, but something just doesn't seem quite right to me. Now, I know Rocco Welsh is a dang good wrestler, but again, Shane Griffith just seems a little bit off to me. To the point where I wouldn't be too shocked if he didn't end up at the podium in March. Maybe I'm wrong, but he has been very passive in his past few matches. And then heavyweight. Now, let me say I did not expect this upset. But first, Nick Feldman has got to stop taking bottom. But he came in clutch in the third period and got a takedown that ultimately caused him to win the match. And this is a huge victory for Nick Feldman over number 4 ranked Lucas Davidson. Now, I'm still not sure we see Nick Feldman on the podium come March, but after being ranked number 1 in his recruiting class, it's gotta be a positive for Ohio State fans to start to see the potential that Nick Feldman has reveal itself on the mat. So that wraps up that match, and we turn the page over to the ACC for the NC State versus Pittsburgh duel. And make sure you subscribe so I can get to 10K subscribers before the end of the season. See, I said it really quick before you could skip forward. A lot of you guys skip forward when I start to ask for subscriptions. So I said it quick so you couldn't skip forward. I don't want to ask for them, but if I don't ask for them, you don't subscribe. So hit the button. But anyways, with Jacob Camacho's struggles down at 125, it does appear like NC State's new starter at 125 is Jarrett Trombley. And as an NC State fan, it's probably justified. Jarrett Trombley is a quality wrestler. He is a 3-time NCAA qualifier. And remember, he was 1 second away from beating Matt Ramos, who eventually would beat Spencer Lee and make the national finals. So he is a quality wrestler. And with Jacob Camacho's struggles, I think it makes sense to give Jarrett Trombley a try. And in his first showing down at 125, he didn't disappoint and got a quality win over a ranked wrestler in Colton Camacho. And then there was the match of the duel of Ryan Jack versus Cole Matthews. And this was an exciting, fun match to watch. Now, it would have been more fun if Ryan Jack would have won, but it was a high-scoring match with some pretty fun scrambles. And let me say this, Cole Matthews at the NCAA tournament is not going to get a very high seed because he has quite a few losses on the year. He'll probably end up somewhere between 12 and 18, and he's going to be a bad draw. If you're the 3 seed and you get Cole Matthews in the second round, that's going to be a real disappointment because he's really good. He just had a few matches that didn't go his way this year for whatever reason, and so he could really be a bracket buster come March. And then NC State finally has its starter at 165 pounds. Derek Fields was a pretty highly ranked recruit and really hasn't panned out so far, but he's starting to flash some real potential. He had a really nice win over number 14 ranked Holden Heller of Pittsburgh, which was also a really entertaining match. Some pretty fun scrambles in that match. But overall, NC State wrestled pretty darn good versus a very solid Pittsburgh team, the same Pittsburgh team that beat Ohio State early in the year. So let's move on to a couple individual matchups. And this year, I have been very impressed with Dustin Plott. He's a lot better than I thought he was, or at least he's gotten a lot better than his previous years. To the point where I think he's probably a clear number 2 at 184 pounds. But the number 1, Parker Keckeisen, beat him by 6 points. Almost a major decision. Parker Keckeisen is 15-0 on the year, and 12 of those matches were by bonus points. Come March, I'm not sure anyone's going to come close to beating Parker. And while we're talking about 184 pounds, I want to talk about Bennett Berge, who had a nice win over Sam Wolf. And Damian Hahn has put together quite an impressive program at South Dakota State. They have a pretty good squad with 3 potential All-Americans, and Bennett Berge is a redshirt freshman, so he's a guy we're going to be seeing a lot of throughout the next 4 years. A potential 4-time All-American at South Dakota State. And personally, I hope we see it happen. Now let's turn it back to some dual talk. We had Oklahoma State versus Iowa State, and I've said this before, but what a heck of a turnaround by Oklahoma State, finishing 17th, 18th last year at the national tournament and producing this quality of team that beat a very good Iowa State team. And the first match I want to talk about is 141 pounds, where Tegan Jamison beat Anthony Echemendia. And I'm not sure what to make of Echemendia. I can't quite get a read on him. He's somewhat of a mixed bag. And at the national tournament, I really think he's a guy who could go 1 and 2 or push and place like 4th on the podium. It really just depends on how he's clicking the day. I think he could pull off some big wins, but I'm a little hesitant to say he can pull off 5 big wins, 4 big wins in a row. And that's why at the NCAA tournament, I think his results are going to be somewhat unpredictable. And then we had at 149, Casey Swiderski beat Sammy Alvarez. And Casey Swiderski is a great example of why the 5-match rule for freshmen is such a good rule, and why most of the time true freshmen should probably redshirt. Because Casey Swiderski came out of high school, was a highly rated ranked recruit, wrestled as a true freshman, and didn't have the best year. But after having a year under his belt, bumping up a weight class, he's really starting to turn the corner and pushing for that All-American podium spot. And then at 165 pounds, I mean, what is there to say other than David Carr does what David Carr does? I mean, he really had a controlled win over number 4 ranked Isaac Olenek. I think I said that right. Very controlled win, 8-1, just dominant fashion. So David Carr, while he lost at CKLV, he's going to be right in there the mix with Keegan O'Toole and Mitchell Messenbrink. And then we talked about Dustin Plott earlier. At 184 pounds, he put a hurting on Will Fieldcamp. Like I said, Dustin Plott, to me, he looks much improved over what he was previous years. I know he was an All-American other years, but this is the first year where I really felt like, yes, he is a for sure All-American, for sure going to get on the podium, and could potentially make the finals. And then the last duel I want to talk about, the last duel of the weekend, Missouri versus Cornell. And I gotta talk about Meyer Shapiro. He is so fun to watch. He's a little wild at times, but he is fast, he's technical, and in this match, his gas tank looked good. I'm really excited about Meyer Shapiro's future and about what he can do at the national tournament. If you can't tell yet, I have a big bias towards wrestlers that just go out on the wrestling mat and let it rip. And Meyer Shapiro kind of fits that description to a T. Then there was Keegan O'Toole getting a major decision over Julian Ramirez. So Keegan O'Toole bounces back from that close call from Peyton Hall to get a really controlled win over Julian Ramirez. But Keegan did give up the first takedown to Julian Ramirez, and he gave up 2 takedowns to Peyton Hall. So whatever it is, Keegan has got to figure out how to not give up his legs, because if he's going to give up his legs to David Carr and Mitchell Messenbrink, I'm not sure he can make that comeback versus them like he did with Peyton Hall. So he's got to get that figured out. And then one other note, I keep talking about the Hodge Trophy. He's been taken down a couple times in the last few matches. Everything matters when you're talking about votes for the Hodge Trophy. How many times has Carter been taken down? How many times has Aaron Brooks been taken down? So when you have a bonus rate so high, they're going to start looking about how many takedowns did you give up in the year. So that's just something to think about as we get closer on voters deciding who's going to win the Hodge Trophy. And then there was Cardenas, who beats number 3 ranked Rocky Elam. And what this kind of tells me is there's Aaron Brooks number 1, there's Trent Hidley number 2, and then number 3 through number 10 can all be kind of mixed up. I don't think this puts Cardenas kind of in another realm. To me, it just kind of pulls Rocky Elam back down to the fold with the other guys at 197 pounds. That's it for this week. Subscribe.